Oh my gosh. I know you say, hey, Tam fam. Hey, family.
You know, it is so crazy. People always ask me, say, Sherri says, hey, family. You say, hey, Tam fam. And it's the truth. Like, when I thought of Tam fam, and you feel the same way, family means everything. We don't...
Y'all, what if everything you thought you knew about daytime TV was a lie? What if this wasn't a cancellation, but a calculated takedown? Because behind the smiles, the applause, and the polished interviews, a silent execution was already in motion. And this time, the truth isn't coming from outsiders. It's coming from inside the system itself. Tamron Hall just broke her silence, and what she's allegedly revealing is darker than anyone expected. I stayed quiet, but what I saw, it was all planned. And right there, everything changes. Because according to Tamron, Sherri Shepherd wasn't failing. She was being set up to fail. Piece by piece, moment by moment, her platform was quietly stripped, her strongest segments cut, her viral reach suppressed, her influence slowly erased, all while the audience was fed a different story. Ratings. Decline. She's too safe. She's not viral enough. But what if that narrative was engineered? Because in today's media war, chaos isn't a risk, it's currency. And while Sherri was fighting to hold her ground, something else was happening in the shadows. A return, already mapped out. A throne, already claimed. Because behind the scenes, the industry wasn't reacting, it was repositioning. And at the center of it all, Wendy Williams. Not a comeback, a takeover. This isn't just gossip. This is strategy, power, control. And if this is how one voice was silenced.
The Image Award for Outstanding Host of a talk show. Because you had said something in your speech that sometimes you had thought that God had forgotten you.
Yes.
And you said that I picked up the phone. I don't go in DMs often, but it went down in the DM that day.
You did the DM.
I DM'd you because I was so full, because we can relate to believing or thinking for that moment that maybe I've been forgotten and why.
Yes, there was so many questions. Sometimes, I don't question God a lot, but I was just like, I've had this dream of doing my own talk show for so long, and everybody keeps saying no. Every answer was, you're not enough. Maybe we can make you this, maybe we can make you that, but it basically was like, you're not enough. And I was like,
y'all, after that silence was broken, nothing about this story feels accidental anymore. What looked like a routine shift in daytime TV now reads like something far more calculated, far more deliberate, and far more dangerous. Because according to Tamron Hall, the fall of Sherri Shepherd didn't begin when ratings dipped. It began long before the audience ever noticed anything was wrong. It started quietly. Small changes. Subtle shifts. The kind you don't question until it's too late. Segments that once performed well suddenly disappeared. Interviews that could have gone viral were buried, never pushed, never amplified. Moments designed to connect with audiences were cut short, re-edited, or replaced entirely. And on the surface, everything still looked normal. The smiles were still there. The applause still sounded real. But behind the curtain, something else was unfolding. Tamron allegedly describes it as a controlled isolation. A process where a host isn't removed overnight, but slowly disconnected from everything that gives them power. Audience reach, digital presence, cultural momentum, all of it quietly dialed down. And the most unsettling part? Sherri didn't even know it was happening. Because every time there was a chance for her to break through digitally, to trend, to go viral, to dominate the conversation, something blocked it. Clips weren't pushed. Algorithms didn't favor her content. Social media traction stalled, unnaturally. Meanwhile, a narrative began forming. She's too polished. She plays it safe. She doesn't create moments.
People don't understand when we are in power, the battles we gotta fight that you will never know about. Never. Yeah.
Right. Well, your privacy has always been important to me, and I would never say something that you didn't say. But I know that if you look at me, then clearly the world will know that you've already had the forbidden fruit.
Cancellation of Sherri Shepherd's show after just 4 seasons feels bigger than one talk show ending. The daytime TV space is changing, and Sherri's rise is inseparable from the Wendy Williams show. We all remember when Sherri was a recurring guest host during Wendy Williams' health hiatus and was officially given Wendy's 10 a.m. spot. Once it was obvious Wendy wouldn't be ready to come back.
At first, it sounded like harmless critique. But Tamron suggests it was something else entirely, a script being written in real time. A reputation slowly reshaped, so when the fall finally came, it would feel justified. Because in today's media landscape, perception is everything. And once the audience believes you're fading, the system doesn't have to push you out. You walk out on your own. But Sherri wasn't fading. She was being phased out. Tamron allegedly points to internal decisions that made it impossible for Sherri to compete in the new digital battlefield. Producers were quietly swapped. Creative direction shifted without warning. The tone of the show began to change, but not in her favor. It was like watching someone fight for control, in a room where every lever had already been moved against them. And still, she kept showing up. Still delivering. Still believing the game was fair. But the game had already changed. Because this wasn't about talent anymore. It was about numbers. Algorithms. Engagement. Control.
Our show has not been renewed for another season. And I want to say to y'all, everybody, y'all try not to faint or fall out, because healthcare is expensive and none of us have it anymore. So y'all don't fall out. But I have to say, in thinking about it, I'm truly overwhelmed by the outpouring of love that I have received from all of you. The messages, I feel every bit of the love that you've been sending to me. And thank you so much. But I want to be clear. I'm not ready to throw in the towel on this show just yet. I'm not. We're going to be airing episodes all through the fall, and we're going to continue to fight to keep the show alive in some way, shape, or form. Yes.
And Sherri, despite her experience, her credibility, her connection with real viewers, didn't fit the new formula. Not because she lacked impact, but because her impact couldn't be measured the way the system demanded. Tamron allegedly makes one thing clear. In this era, if you can't dominate digitally, you become invisible, no matter how powerful your voice is in real life. And that's exactly what started happening. Sherri's presence didn't disappear overnight. It was reduced, piece by piece, until what remained no longer matched who she was. Loyal viewers felt the shift, but couldn't explain it. Something was off, but nothing was obvious. And that's how it works. Not loud, not messy, clean, precise, almost surgical. By the time questions started being asked, the answers had already been controlled. And as Sherri continued to stand on a stage that was quietly shrinking beneath her, somewhere else, another stage was already being prepared.
Banks made the models, specifically Danny and Joni, go to the dentist to get their teeth pulled and gap fixed, or else they'd be kicked off the show and sent home. And despite Danny winning it all, she couldn't book shit because she was stigmatized as a reality TV star, which Tyra knew would happen but chose to do nothing about it. Tyra also made her model Ebony shave her head, which was done by condescending white hairstylist who gave her 3 bald spots with dog clippers. And in that same moment of weakness, Tyra called her out for always being ashy and said her shoots were the hardest to do because of her skin, which was damn near perfect. There was also a model by the name of Shani Sullivan who was SA'd while under the influence in Italy, and the cameraman decided to record the entire thing for good television. And years later, Shani told Tyra on her talk show that she couldn't watch the show because of all the trauma she endured, and Tyra responded by showing the clips from Italy to everyone watching. Dion, a model from Cycle 8, was forced to pose as a gunshot wound victim when production knew her mom was paralyzed due to gunshot. They also made the models look and dress homeless with real homeless people in the backgrounds, as well as pose as drug addicts and people with EDs. And this is the real kicker. They made the models swap races for not only one shoot, but 2, in which the black models will turn Native American and Korean, and the white models will turn African and African American, all whom were accompanied by 3-year-old who matched their swap ethnicities and races. So what was Tyra's explanation for blackface, you may ask? Well, she said this was her way of showing that black and brown were beautiful.
This was my way of showing the world that brown and black is beautiful.
As if she couldn't use the black and brown models that she already had on set. And despite Tyra getting made fun of for her weight IRL, she made a model by the name of Kenya do a shoot as Gluttony and an elephant because her stomach was a little bigger compared to the other models. Kenya also voiced the fact that she was uncomfortable while working with a male model by the name of Bertini, but it was ultimately brushed off by production. But come to find out, the final shot they chose was bro gripping her thigh. Is that a coincidence? We all obviously seen the "We were all rooting for you" clip.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
Which I didn't think was that bad until she blew up the fact that Tiffany's grandmom had her lights turned off because she had to buy a swimsuit for the competition.
Y'all, while Sherri Shepherd was still showing up, still smiling through the pressure, still believing she had time to turn things around, the truth was far colder. The decision had already been made. And according to what Tamron Hall allegedly reveals, everything that followed wasn't a reaction, it was execution. Because once the narrative was set, the system didn't need chaos. It needed control. Behind the scenes, the strategy intensified. Meetings that Sherri once had access to? Suddenly, she wasn't in the room. Decisions about her own show were being made without her input. Segments were being approved, edited, and sometimes removed entirely before she even had a chance to push back. And the most chilling part? No one said anything out loud. No warnings. No confrontations, just silence and shifts. Tamron allegedly describes it as a perfect illusion where everything feels stable on camera, but behind it, the structure is collapsing in real time. Even the audience became part of the setup. Because while viewers were watching full episodes, the real battle was happening in clips. Short, viral moments. The kind that dominate timelines, spark debates, and keep a host relevant beyond television. But Sherri's clips? They weren't circulating.
I regret making that girl chop her own hand off? Of course I do. Of course I do. Do I see it differently now? Of course I do. 2020 vision in hindsight? Of course I wouldn't make her do that. But you guys made me do that. That's what I'm saying. It's reality TV. You guys would have been more mad at me if I didn't make her do that. You see what I'm saying? My hands were tied. Okay, production said, you have to do this or the show is canceled. Okay, even though it was my idea to make her chop her hand off. And I spearheaded the whole thing. But my hands were tied. You guys forced me to do that. Would I do that today? Of course I wouldn't. Of course I wouldn't do that today. But we're in a different time now. We live in a different time. Do I regret making her chop her hand off? Of course I do. Would I take it back? Yeah.
Moments that could have trended, didn't. Segments that could have sparked conversation, disappeared. And slowly, without realizing it, her presence outside the show began to fade. Which, in today's industry, is everything. Tamron allegedly makes it clear, this wasn't about who had the best show. It was about who controlled the narrative beyond the show. And Sherri was losing that control. At the same time, pressure started building in places no one expected. Scheduling conflicts appeared out of nowhere. Opportunities overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. Projects that should have elevated her quietly stalled. From the outside, it looked like bad timing. But from the inside, it felt orchestrated. Like every path forward was being redirected before she could even take the next step. And while all of this was happening, another story was being written. Quietly, carefully, strategically. Because according to Tamron, this wasn't just about removing one voice. It was about making space for another. Wendy Williams.
Understand, when we are in power, the battles we gotta fight that you will never know about. Never. To keep a show on the air, there are things that we have to do that people will tell us, if you want to stay on the air, this is what you got to do. And we got to weigh the options. And sometimes we make bad decisions and we look up and we go, in hindsight, maybe I should not have done it. I've been up all night watching Netflix's documentary about Tyra Banks and America's Next Top Model. When I tell you I was hooked, I understand why people are mad. I do understand. But I also say you have to understand the time that this all happened was in 2003. Reality TV was a wild, wild west back then. Every show was trying to outdo each other to stay on the air. We had people that were eating rats on Survivor. We had people getting in a vat of spiders on Fear Factor. Simon Cowell was telling people they sucked to their faces. I cannot forget that Tyra that was a young black woman trying to make it in the reality TV game. Like it just, now we have a plethora of TV shows. We're not naive to what goes on behind the scenes in reality shows today. So we're trying to compare a time today that we know a lot to a time when they were
not in the loud, headline-grabbing way people expected, but in a way that would feel inevitable, almost natural. Social media accounts began to shift. Branding subtly changed. The tone of the space Sherri once occupied started evolving, less like a continuation and more like a transition. But no one said it directly. They didn't have to. Because by the time the audience starts asking questions, the answer has already been placed in front of them. Tamron allegedly suggests that Wendy's return wasn't spontaneous. It was mapped out long before Sherri's decline became visible. Every adjustment, every quiet change, every missing moment was part of a larger design. A repositioning of power. And in that design, Sherri wasn't a failure. She was a step. A necessary move in a much bigger game. Which makes the entire situation even darker. Because it means no matter how hard she worked, no matter how consistent she stayed, no matter how much her audience believed in her, the outcome may have already been decided. And that's what turns this from industry politics into something far more unsettling. Because if a career can be redirected this quietly, if a voice can be reduced this precisely, then what we're watching on screen isn't reality, it's control. And just when it seemed like the shift was complete, like the transition had already been sealed, One final move was about to make everything undeniable.
Tyra did not take accountability. It's been a lot of backlash online and everywhere. What should Tyra do?
Well, wow. Yeah. She answered questions.
She should answer the questions that they ask her.
I mean, look, I'm not her publicist.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure who her publicist is.
Y'all, by the time the final move was made, it didn't look like a takeover. It looked seamless. No chaos.no public fallout.no dramatic announcement that would raise questions. Just a quiet shift that felt almost natural. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because according to what Tamron Hall allegedly exposes, the final phase wasn't about removing Sherri Shepherd anymore. It was about rewriting the story, so no one would ever question why she was gone. By this point, the narrative had already taken hold. Her numbers dropped. She couldn't compete. She lost momentum. But Tamron suggests something far more calculated. Those narratives weren't reactions. They were planted. Because once the audience believes a version of events, the truth doesn't have to disappear. It just has to be quieter. Behind the scenes, the structure Sherri once stood on had already been dismantled. Her digital presence? Fragmented. Her production control? Gone. Her ability to shape her own show? Reduced to almost nothing. And still, she showed up. Still delivered. Still carried the weight of a platform that was no longer fully hers. But the system had already moved on. Because while Sherri was fighting to hold onto a space that was shrinking beneath her, another presence was rising. Not loudly, not suddenly, but strategically. Wendy Williams. According to Tamron, every step of that return had been mapped with precision. Social media ecosystems were recalibrated. Audience attention was redirected. Even the tone of daytime conversation began to shift, subtly aligning with the energy Wendy was known for. It wasn't just a comeback. It was positioning. Because in this new era of media, you don't just return. You re-enter with dominance already built in. And that's exactly what this looked like. A space cleared. A narrative controlled. An audience conditioned. So when the moment came, it didn't feel like something new. It felt expected. And that's when the reality becomes impossible to ignore. Because if everything Tamron allegedly reveals is true, then Sherri's exit wasn't a result. It was a requirement. A necessary clearing of the board to ensure that when Wendy stepped back in, there would be no resistance. No competition. No confusion. Just acceptance. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not that it happened, but how cleanly it happened. No scandal big enough to expose IT.no breakdown loud enough to question IT.no evidence obvious enough to stop it. Just a perfectly executed transition, hidden behind the illusion of change. And in the middle of it all, a host who gave years of her voice, her energy, her presence. Reduced to a headline. Replaced by a narrative she never controlled. Because in this system, as Tamron allegedly reveals, talent doesn't guarantee survival. Control does. Visibility does. And most importantly, positioning does. So the next time a show disappears, the next time a host suddenly falls off, the next time the story feels just a little too clean, you have to ask yourself, is it really what it looks like? Or is it something else entirely? Something quieter, something calculated, something already decided long before we ever noticed? Because if this was a blueprint, then it won't be the last time we see it play out. And the real question isn't what happened to Sherri Shepherd. The real question is, who's already next in line and doesn't even know it yet? Y'all, if this really unfolded the way it's being alleged, then what you just watched isn't a career decline, it's a controlled demolition. Not loud, not messy, but precise enough that by the time anyone noticed, it was already over. And that should shake you. Because if a voice as established as Sherri Shepherd can be reduced this quietly, then no position in this industry is safe. They told you it was ratings. They sold you a narrative of decline. They framed it as evolution. But behind that polished story, there are claims of strategy, influence, and a system that rewards control over credibility. And if what Tamron Hall allegedly exposed is even partially true, then this wasn't just about one host losing a slot, it was about reshaping power while the audience stayed distracted. Because while one presence was being slowly erased, another was being carefully rebuilt. Not randomly. Not emotionally. Strategically. And that's where Wendy Williams enters the picture, not as a surprise, but as a final move already calculated. This is bigger than gossip. This is about how narratives are manufactured, how influence is engineered, and how easily perception can be controlled when the system decides who stays visible and who disappears. So now the question hits harder than ever. If this can happen in silence, how many other stories have been rewritten before they ever reached you? Watch closely. Question everything. Because the next headline you believe might already be part of a script you were never meant to see.